But there are mounting questions for the BBC and the journalist Martin Bashir tonight over what he did to secure his panorama interview with Princess Diana.
Welcome to WatchMojoUK, and today we're looking at the biggest scandals of the BBC's own making.
Before we begin, we publish new content every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
No,
It's not impartial anymore either.
No, that is not true. No,
Number 20. ADHD. You might not expect Panorama to be so controversial, but its investigations aren't always up to snuff.
On Panorama, we investigate the private clinics diagnosing ADHD online.
A prime example was this documentary about private ADHD diagnoses released in 2023, in which a journalist tried to see how easy it was to pay to get a diagnosis and then get a prescription. The documentary concluded that it was too easy, but viewers with ADHD were horrified.
The clinic diagnosed her with ADHD after a 40-minute chat online, and she's been prescribed powerful drugs.
Many pointed out not only that ADHD is underdiagnosed, particularly in women and girls, but that people wouldn't need to turn to private clinics at all if the NHS didn't leave tens of thousands of adults stuck on years-long waiting lists. Panorama never made that point and hardly engaged with ADHD organisations or neurodiverse patients.
Well, here's the results. Your results are highly consistent with ADHD.
Number 19. Nagamuns Trump comments.
And every time I have been told, as a woman of colour, to go home, go back to where I came from, that was embedded in racism.
In 2019, BBC breakfast presenter Nagamuns, one of the corporation's most well-known journalists, made some comments about Donald Trump and what he'd been saying about his Democrat rivals. Munchetti discussed it with co-host Dan Walker, and though she was very diplomatic, and even commented on air that she knows she shouldn't give an opinion, viewers still complained.
I can't see why we still have to treat racism as though it's a legitimate opinion.
What those viewers got out of arguing the BBC wasn't being impartial enough about Donald Trump, of all people, who knows? But the BBC investigated and initially upheld the complaints, but only for Munchetti, not for Walker. This was an obvious double standard, and it was eventually overturned.
In this instance, I don't think Naga's words were sufficient to merit a partial uphold of the complaint around the comments she made.
Number 18. Prince Philip's death.
We are interrupting our normal programmes to bring you an important announcement.
This wasn't immoral necessarily, but it was definitely annoying, and over 110,000 people ended up complaining to the Beeb about it in the end. Following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh in April 2021, the BBC put all of its regularly scheduled programming on hold for round-the-clock documentaries about his life, airing them across all of its channels. Needless to say, people were livid.
A short while ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh.
However you feel about the royal family, people shouldn't be forced to sit and watch endless documentaries about them if they don't want to, and there was no need for multiple BBC channels to all air the same coverage at once.
It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband.
It got more complaints than even Jerry Springer the Opera. Number 17. The Strictly scandal.
Every single day there seems to be a bit of an addition to the story.
It's clear now that a lot of the shine has come off of the BBC's most glamorous show. Despite being the corporation's most popular winter offering for the last 20 years, Strictly isn't above criticism, and former star Amanda Abbington blew the whistle after quitting the show during the 2023 series.
His past dance partners were getting in touch with you and saying what?
I'm so sorry.
She said that she'd been mistreated by Giovanni Panice and that the BBC was withholding footage of her training sessions, footage that would prove she's telling the truth.
What the BBC are now actually discussing is to have chaperones in the training room now, which I actually personally think is a good idea.
Other celebs have spoken out too, including Zara McDermott, who said dancer Graziano De Prima had kicked her. Panice and De Prima have left, but De Prima is now suing the Beeb. Number 16. Ageism. Every few years, the BBC sacks or reshuffles its presenters in such a way that allegations of ageism begin to surface, and more than once, the cases have been won by those wronged ex-employees.
Well, let's get some more now on the age discrimination case brought by the former presenter of the BBC's Countryfile programme, Miriam O'Reilly.
Most notable was Miriam O'Reilly, who was booted off Countryfile when it was made a primetime show. She said that it was a clear example of age discrimination and took the Beeb to court, where she ended up winning.
It was hard to take on the BBC because I love the BBC, I loved working there.
The BBC found itself in a similar situation when Moira Stewart stepped down in 2007, sparking rumours that she'd gotten tired of the way older women were treated, while in 2023 it started up again, when BBC News and BBC World News were merged.
But I felt that I was treated badly because of my age, and standing up to the BBC was the right thing to do, however hurtful, however stressful it has been.
Number 15. Saxgate.
Inappropriate and unacceptable. Now Gordon Brown joins the chorus of disapproval against Russell Brand and Jonathan Ross.
In 2008, the news cycle was set ablaze with the story that Russell Brand and Jonathan Ross had left obscene messages on actor Andrew Sachs' phone about his granddaughter, Georgina Bailey.
I said some things I didn't have oughta, like I had sex with your granddaughter.
This was part of a series of messages left on the answer phone of actor Andrew Sachs.
The scandal was massive and decimated Russell Brand's mainstream media career, though Jonathan Ross ultimately managed to survive. Years later, however, and the story got worse when allegations were made against Brand. People began speaking out about how he was allowed to do whatever he wanted, particularly while working at the BBC.
As far as Russell Brand and Jonathan Ross are concerned, I believe that they should not be allowed to get away with this, and I hope now that the BBC will look very carefully at their contracts.
Radio 2's controller, Leslie Douglas, didn't rein him in and ultimately resigned as well. She actually approved that the Saxgate broadcast should go ahead, knowing exactly what was going to happen. Number 14. Jeremy Corbyn's hat.
Are you someone who's happy to be, if you like, let's say in the wilderness, against the entire mainstream?
This bizarre scandal emerged in 2018, when Corbyn was still the leader of the Labour Party. A picture of him next to the Kremlin was used as a background graphic on an episode of Newsnight, and the BBC was quickly hit with allegations that the picture had been edited to make Corbyn's hat appear more Russian.
Let's talk about whether the left can ever win an election.
They also made it red to match the background, which they didn't do when using a picture of Gavin Williamson with the same graphics a few weeks before.
But if people don't like austerity, which I think is your thesis, why would they vote for austerity heavy? Why wouldn't they vote for austerity light? I mean, this is the basic problem with saying we weren't left-wing enough.
The BBC denied it, but it wasn't the only time the corporation got into hot water with Corbyn. In 2023, it said that Corbyn had never apologised for the Labour anti-Semitism scandal, when he had done so many times. Number 13. Cliff Richard.
A small convoy of unmarked police cars arrived mid-morning.
Who knew that a few hours of helicopter footage would cost the BBC £2 million? Apparently not them, or they may not have done this.
From the air, though, the cars could be seen as they parked and as the police team made its way towards the empty apartment owned by Sir Cliff Richard.
Back in 2014, Cliff Richard's home was raided and searched by police during Operation U-Tree. Strangely though, somebody gave the BBC advance knowledge that this was going to happen, so they brought out the choppers and broadcast the search live from the skies.
The investigation is linked to an alleged incident that took place in the county back in the 1980s.
No evidence has ever been found to support any allegations made against Cliff Richard, and he took the BBC to court for violating his privacy, winning millions in both damages and legal costs, along with an apology for what happened.
It was incredibly emotional for me to think that after 3 years, 11 months and 4 days, it's really finally over.
Number 12. North Korea.
North Korea's Supreme Commander Kim Jong-un is threatening thermonuclear war against the United States.
It's rare that choices made by the BBC put people in genuine danger, but this did happen during the filming of yet another controversial Panorama episode in 2013. The BBC sent notable investigative journalist John Sweeney undercover with students from the London School of Economics.
So, welcome to the real North Korea.
Not only were the students not told what was going on, but neither were the North Korean authorities. If they'd been caught harbouring a journalist trying to lift the lid on life north of the border, we don't doubt that many arrests would have been made.
It's immediately clear we've come to North Korea at an interesting time.
It was shocking that anybody thought the journalism was worth putting these oblivious students at risk of arrest. Number 11. Hugh Edwards.
Hugh Edwards was the BBC's highest paid newsreader, fronting first the 6 o'clock news and then the news at 10.
This scandal has been diabolical on a number of levels. First was the BBC's own relentless reporting that a high-profile presenter had been accused of receiving explicit images of a teenage boy, all based on allegations in The Sun. Eventually, Vicky Flynn announced that the unnamed presenter was her husband, Hugh Edwards. Edwards maintained a low profile, but found himself arrested in November 2023, charged with accessing indecent images of minors.
But Hugh Edwards hasn't been on our screens for a year, following reports in the Sun newspaper claiming he'd paid a young person for explicit images.
But in July of the following year, it came out that the BBC knew about this, asked the police to keep quiet, and kept paying Edwards tens of thousands until his resignation in April, including giving him a pay rise. The Beeb didn't even bother to sack him, though it's now demanding he repay the money.
The BBC is facing questions about why Hugh Edwards, having been suspended, remained on a full salary and had a £40,000 pay rise.
Number 10. TV licence harassment. Even if you diligently pay your TV licence, you've probably received a snotty letter or email from them trying to catch you out.
The government has frozen the BBC licence fee at £159 for the next 2 years and is considering other ways to fund the corporation.
The simple fact is that if you don't watch BBC shows on demand or live broadcasts, you don't need the licence. To boot, TV licence agents don't have any authority to come into your house when they show up.
But I just don't think that we should be forced to the point of we could face prison if we don't pay for it.
Despite this, the BBC still likes to threaten people with fines of up to £1,000 and criminal convictions. You may agree that Britain having the BBC is a good thing, but nobody wants to be harassed, and over the years, support for changing the BBC's funding method has only grown.
Why should I have to face prosecution if I don't pay it?
What
That
you're
is the
hearing, John,
argument.
from...
Number 9. Blue Peter phone-ins.
Check out this little fella. This is our brand new kitten, Cookie. He's only 13 weeks old.
It wasn't the only show caught in this scandal, nor was the BBC the only channel, but there's something to be said about scamming a bunch of kids who don't know any better. Multiple broadcasters were caught out by Ofcom for rigging their phone-in competitions and charging outrageous rates, but Blue Peter got into trouble for faking competitions numerous times. Notably, there was the Socks vs Cookie contest, in which Cookie won the online poll, but the name Socks was chosen by producers.
That was wrong, and so today we'd like to say that we're sorry.
Yep, we would.
Worse was when they faked a phone-in competition the very same year, bringing on a random kid to pretend to be the winner.
The man who was the editor of Blue Peter at the time has, we understand, been suspended because he was also the editor when Blue Peter rigged the result of a phone-in.
Number 8. Gender pay gap. In 2018, it came out that there was a massive disparity in the rates male and female employees were paid at the BBC, in the first time it published such figures.
We've said all on air we're going to get to 50-50, and we've also said we're going to get rid of the gender pay gap. So that's the gap between all men and women employed at the BBC.
This was the BBC's top stars, with numerous top female broadcasters getting paid significantly less than their male counterparts. The BBC was investigated for the disparities, which happened between 2016 and 2017, and the issue was debated across rival broadcasters.
Will all have pay parity by 2020, all of them?
On average. So when you compare what women earn compared to what men earn, you will get rid of the gap which exists at the moment.
However, in subsequent years, it's become clear that the pay disparity is still present, and, in fact, has gotten larger, as reported in 2021. That's despite many presenters getting raises in response to the scandal initially.
That's a very good question. I think if someone's got exactly the same job, the same experience, the same history, the same audience value, of course they're paid the same amount.
Number 7. Battle of Orgreave coverage. On the 18th of June 1984, there was a violent clash between striking miners and South Yorkshire police in the small village of Orgreave. More than 100 people were injured, but the BBC's coverage of the incident implied that the miners had been violent and that the police response had been justified.
The allegation that a mass police cover-up took place after Orgreave involving perjury and the doctoring of statements in the wake of police violence against the miners.
It did this by broadcasting the miners' violence first and the police second, suggesting it was them who started it when really the police were to blame.
We need a full inquiry into Orgreave in the same way as we did for Hillsborough.
Public inquiry?
Full public inquiry. This is the only way we can get all the facts out in the open.
Numerous investigations have since proven the miners were wrongly maligned and unjustly shown as violent, and activists have been demanding an apology from the BBC for years. It's still yet to arrive, though. Number 6. Martin Bashir's interview with Diana. This explosive tell-all interview aired on the BBC in 1995, showing the Princess of Wales talking candidly about her life as a royal and her marriage to Prince Charles.
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
It angered Buckingham Palace because Diana wasn't cleared to go ahead with it, but years later, and it angered a lot of other people too. It turned out that journalist Martin Bashir had attained this interview with Diana through fraud by threatening her with false bank statements.
25 years on, Diana's brother Earl Spencer wants an apology. He introduced Martin Bashir to his sister in 1995, but says Bashir showed him faked evidence.
This all came out in 2020 after an inquiry, which also found Bashir had breached the BBC's editorial standards and the BBC had to apologise to Diana's family.
It's one of the worst chapters in the BBC's history, in my view. Says the rogue reporter who gets one of the world's greatest scoops by means of deception.
Number 5. Fake child labour.
They're dropped off at a factory that makes clothes for the British High Street. They don't have work permits, so they can only work illegally.
In 2008, an episode of Panorama called Primark on the Rack aired, showing shocking footage of child labour practices ongoing in factories used by Primark. The factories were in Bangalore, India, and appear to show 3 young boys involved in making clothes. However, Primark disputed the findings, though it still fired 3 of its manufacturers, and it later came out that the footage had been faked.
The reason that Primark can offer its products at such affordable prices is because our business model is different for other retailers.
Worse, the BBC knew the footage was fake before putting it in Panorama, as evidence showed, and the broadcaster had to apologise to Primark 3 years later.
Primark cares about standards in its supply chain. These are all laid out in the Code of Conduct.
Number 4. Transphobic article. The BBC has recently gotten in more and more trouble where trans rights are concerned, often refusing to report on protests outside its own offices and, in 2021, quitting its coalition with LGBT charity Stonewall over disagreements on the BBC's trans coverage.
Determined to be heard, this is Trans Pride marching through central London earlier.
But matters got worse later that same year when an article was published on the BBC claiming that lesbians were being pressured into sex by some trans women. Very quickly, the article was debunked as being wildly inaccurate, quoting a baseless study and featuring an interview with a woman who was, even at the time, a self-admitted predator and bigot.
Hopefully marches like this show people that trans people are just people and we deserve a few more rights in this country.
LGBT charities unanimously agreed that the article was harmful, but the BBC has only responded poorly.
The message here today is the trans community needs to have equal rights.
Number 3. Axing CBBC. In 2022, news broke that the BBC's controller Tim Davie was going to be axing CBBC and BBC4.
The BBC has announced it plans to stop broadcasting the CBBC channel on TV in the future.
The channels will eventually disappear from broadcast and will be moved permanently online. Online moves in the past haven't exactly gone smoothly for the Beeb, as it eventually reversed its notorious decision to shift BBC Three online.
The changes are also part of plans to save the company money. However, the TV channel won't end for at least another 3 years.
But while BBC Three was always aimed at teens and young adults, CBBC is one of very few children's channels available on Freeview, and without an internet connection. This means it's going to be the country's most disadvantaged kids who suffer with the loss of CBBC. The BBC blamed competition from Netflix for the decision, bizarrely.
The BBC says that young people prefer to stream things online rather than watch it on TV.
Number 2. BNP on Question Time. For a very short while, the British National Party was one of the largest political parties in the country, until UKIP came along and stole their thunder.
The leader of the British National Party, Nick Griffin.
But the BNP was always controversial thanks to its right-wing, fascist roots. If that seems like a bit of an exaggeration, remember that the party was founded by former members of the National Front, and for a while it had a fascist parliamentary wing.
And it's that difference, by the way, the fact that the BNP defines itself on race, which distinguishes it from every other political party I can think of.
So it was shocking to see the 21st century iteration of the BNP apparently legitimised by a Question Time appearance.
We only won the First World War, and we only won the Second World War because we were joined in those wars by millions of black and Asian people from around the world.
Leader at the time, Nick Griffin, appeared on the show, landing the BBC in hot water for platforming an anti-immigrant reactionary on prime-time television. Number 1. Jimmy Savile. Enabling Jimmy Savile for decades and seemingly ignoring his appalling behaviour until after his death is undoubtedly the worst thing the BBC bosses have done.
Today, a week after the story first hit, the BBC Director-General George Entwistle apologised.
Hundreds of people came forwards to talk about their experiences after his death in 2011, unravelling years of horrific crimes.
When did public attitudes start to change about Jimmy Savile? You may have said after the ITV documentary last week. You'd be wrong.
Some were even committed, while Savile was volunteering at various hospitals, with full investigations substantiating the claims put to him. It also took a while for the BBC to truly acknowledge what had happened, in the face of numerous exposés from rival outlets like ITV.
She was interviewed last week and explained that she told her story to Newsnight, but that Newsnight had decided not to run the story.
It was one of the biggest, most horrendous scandals to ever hit the country, with the BBC at the epicentre. Let us know in the comments whether you believe in paying your TV licence.
First stop. This is tourism, Stalin style.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojoUK and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.